the person with the purpose of improving the relationship between the two of you and improving the other person along with it. A key distinction when it comes to giving feedback is to clarify who has the problem. Let's say person A, one of your coworkers, is constantly late for your team meetings, constantly arrives 5 minutes after you have said that the meeting would start. You are person B, the manager, who gets irritated, annoyed at this, makes you lose your focus, and so forth. So the question is here, who has the problem, A or B? I would say an important distinction for feedback is to be clear that it is B who has the problem. Because in a different world, in a different setting, in a different culture perhaps, being 5 minutes late would be very courteous. It might even mean that you're early. So A does not actually have the problem. B is the person who has the problem in this case, because he or she, you in this case, gets irritated, gets annoyed. So that's where the problem is. And going into a feedback conversation, if you go into a feedback conversation thinking the other person is the problem, that's going to come through. No matter how effectively you formulate, how beautifully you formulate your feedback, if you come in with in the back of your mind thinking the other person is the problem, that's going to shine through. So realize that you have the problem. So sometimes when I give feedback, I start my conversation with saying, I have a problem. And that kind of helps set the tone for the feedback I want to give. We call it an art because there is an aspect of feedback that is about when, how, and where to give it, and how that best fits your personality, that you're not going to be able to pick up from any book or any course. It's just that aspect of feedback is just about getting out there and doing it. It's something that you master with experience. We call it a science because there are some proven ways of doing it, some methods, some perspectives to use when you give feedback that will increase your rate of success, so to speak, when you give feedback, and that will get you going down the road of learning to fully master feedback. And we will cover those techniques, those tips and so forth in the following videos. Remember, it is with feedback as it is with love. If you are not getting enough, give some more. Sometimes when we give feedback, it just doesn't arrive that well in the other person's inbox, so to speak. We have a good intention in our mind, it all made sense, but it doesn't come across that well. So I have found 3 questions that can be really helpful to ask yourself before you give feedback to another person. The first question to ask yourself, is my feedback necessary? Is it necessary? Related to the relationship, the situation, the bottom line of the business, if you're in a business, is my feedback necessary? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Sometimes the answer might be no, it is not really necessary to give this feedback. A little word of warning here. Do not justify not giving feedback by hiding behind saying, oh, it probably isn't necessary, I'll just skip it. Sometimes we use that as an escape route. When we're fearful, when we're afraid of giving feedback, we might hide behind saying, oh, it's probably not really necessary. But ask yourself honestly, is my feedback necessary? Second question, number 2. Is my feedback thought through? Have I thought it through? Sometimes in the rush of the moment when we get irritated or angry or whatever it might be, we give this feedback and the words might come out in a way that, well, it's not that easy for the other person to receive it well, if we put it mildly. So sometimes it's really worth taking the extra moments to think your feedback through. You might not need to give it right there when the behavior that you want to give feedback related to happens. You might just want to sit back for a few moments or come back later in the day again to think it through and change those words a bit perhaps, so there's a better chance of it arriving well with the other person, so to speak. And question number 3, is my feedback loving? Meaning when you give the feedback, Do you give it lovingly? Is the intention to improve the other person and the relationship between the two of you? So is it given from a loving place? Again, asking this question can help stop you from giving some feedback that might worsen the relationship or more come across as you being some kind of know-it-all or show-off or whatever it might be. So is my feedback really loving? So 3 questions to ask yourself before you give feedback to another person. Is my feedback necessary? Is it thought through? Is it loving? Consider this sort of your safety net for ineffective feedback that helps you deliver effective feedback to the people around you. I want to share some tips with you about giving feedback that will help you deliver your feedback in a way that will make it land better with the recipient. Feedback is preferably given on behaviors, something that the person can affect. So that would mean not on you have such a large nose, or you're so stupid, or you're so inconsiderate. So pick out the behavior, something that the person is able to influence and change if they wish to. Give your feedback on a specific behavior. When you came 5 minutes late to the meeting instead of just when you're late to meetings. Be specific. When you were 5 minutes late to the meeting on Monday, or when you interrupt me halfway through my sentence, or even 5 words into my sentence, I get irritated. Or when you say hi to me in the corridor in the morning when we meet the first time of the day, I feel happy. So pick out the specific behavior so the person knows which behavior you're actually giving feedback on that they should continue doing, if it's something you're satisfied with, or if it comes from an unsatisfied feeling, something that they could look at changing. Give the feedback at the right time. Sometimes that is sort of right when it happens because it fits right there. So when it's fresh, sort of. In some cases, it might be better to wait. Either because you're so caught in that emotions. Let's say you get angry or irritated when confronted with a behavior. You might want to cool down a little bit and share your feedback 5 minutes later, or in private a bit later perhaps, depending on the maturity of the group. Or if you're in a meeting with a client, for example, and your coworker does something there, you might wait till after the meeting to share it with your coworker and not in front of the client. So picking out the right time, which is sometimes right when the behavior happens and sometimes a bit later. Give it in the right amount. Don't build up this mountain. I've had this happen where people build up feedback they want to give during a whole year and they don't say anything when the things happen, but they build it up and they have this mountain, and then after a year or wherever, after 3 months, let's say after a year, they open their mouth and this huge, enormous amount of feedback comes out, and it gets totally overwhelming for the other person to even grasp half of it or part of it, so they sort of shut down just as a psychological defense, and you don't get your feedback through. So don't build up too much and give all of that at the same time. If you've built a mountain, pick the most important one and share that. Or best of all, avoid building the mountain. Give the feedback as you go to create that climate of giving feedback in your team and in your workplace. This one might seem almost stupid or super obvious, but believe me, I've seen this kind of out of whack as well. Give your feedback to the right person, meaning the person it concerns. Sometimes we end up corridor talking. We talk about people instead of to people. Don't become one of those people. Give your feedback to the right person, meaning the person the feedback concerns. Use your own experience as the starting point, meaning use I more than you. So don't say you the whole time. You need to get better at this. You need to explain yourself more clearly. Instead of say, when I see this behavior in you, I feel this way, or I have a hard time understanding you. Go for I. Start from I. And when you want to share the feedback, I feel this, I reacted this way, this is important to me. So get I there instead of pointing your fingers at the other person and only saying you the whole time. Get the I in there. Get yourself into the feedback so it becomes more of an opener, opening up the relationship and more clear about what you're saying. And finally, preferably give the feedback when there is a wish to receive feedback. This is not always going to work because it's not always people want feedback, but you feel it is really important to give it anyway for the relationship, for the bottom line of the organization, the business, whatever. If possible, ask the person, would it be okay if I give you some feedback right now? Or find the time when it is okay. If they keep postponing it, you might need to give it anyway again. But preferably give the feedback when there is a wish to receive the feedback, and you will increase the likelihood that the feedback will land well with the other person. A common question related to feedback is, how much positive and negative feedback should I give? How much praise and criticism? I would say that I would shy away from positive and negative feedback and instead talk about effective feedback. If you give it with a purpose of improving the relationship with the other person and the other person, if you give it from a loving place, then it is effective. Whether it's about something that you feel satisfied about or not satisfied about. But for the sake of this part here, let's say we talk about positive and negative. Positive in the shape of something you're satisfied with, and negative in the form of something that you are less satisfied. Let's look at a few different perspectives that might help you answer that question. The sandwich model is popular in several organizations I've encountered through the years and several situations. The sandwich in response to these so-called positive and negative feedbacks, or feedback that come from a satisfied feeling or satisfied experience or an unsatisfied feeling or experience. So if you call them positive and negative, the sandwich model tries to package that negative feedback, the improvement feedback, within two positive feedback. So in this case, you share a positive feedback first, and then you share the negative feedback, the improvement feedback, and then you finish off with the so-called positive feedback, the sort of reinforcing feedback. So you get a sandwich with a top layer, a middle layer, and a bottom layer. And the idea here is to kind of sandwich that improvement feedback in there so it's easier for the other person to hear it. I have found that sometimes this works brilliantly and sometimes it works less brilliantly. So here again, go exploring and see what works for you. The risk you can run here with the sandwich model is that people know when you're giving feedback that, well, they almost don't even listen to the positives anymore. They just wait for that negative thing. I had a woman who worked in a reception, and she said she got this letter from management that it would always start the first half with everything that was working fine in the reception area, and then halfway through the page it had but. And then came the improvements, the changes they wanted. And she said, after a few months, I stopped reading the top part. So you might have this improvement feedback that you want to give. You might not find the other parts for the sandwich. Well, then it might anyway be useful to give that improvement, so they're called negative feedback. But if you can, give the sandwich a try. Might work really well for you. One major lesson learned on my own behalf and that of others, it's better to give something than nothing. Avoid getting stuck in, oh, it's got to be perfectly formulated. It's got to be at the right time and the right amount and everything, yada yada. Give something than nothing. At least you have something to talk about. That which is not communicated does not exist, was said by a wise person some time back. Again, if you don't communicate it, it doesn't exist, and it's kind of an inner conflict that you carry around. So take the risk of it becoming an outer conflict by sharing something. Give the relationship a chance to evolve and become even better and more effective by giving. Key point also to remember, you as the leader, hopefully you're the leader, at least you're the manager. The leader is the role model. Your colleagues will not do as you say, they do as you do. This works for kids. Kids do not do as you say, they do as you do. Same thing at work. Your co-workers will not do as you say if you don't walk the talk. Walk the talk is a classical expression for this. They do as you do. So if you give lots of feedback, give both the so-called positive and the negative, and build that trust in the relationship, then they will do that too.